Motherhood kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. Our first baby, Daisy, was born 4 weeks early. And for 2 days, I had no idea I was in labour. I thought I had really bad trap wind. And so much so, I even went to the doctor, and the doctor didn't realise either. She prescribed me some peppermint oil. So it made me feel a little less stupid. But on the day my daughter was born, I had a routine scan planned anyway. So I went in, and I think the midwives kind of knew as soon as they saw me. They were like, what's going on here? They tried to measure her head, and it was just too far down. They were like, get upstairs, get to the labour ward. And she was born an hour later. So it was a massive whirlwind, and it was a big shock. And we were in hospital for about a week, all in all, because she was a bit early, so she needed a bit of specialist care. And during that week, it was a bit of a crazy time. I really wanted to breastfeed. It was like just one of those things I really wanted to do. Hadn't really given it that much thought. But I was having real issues with it, and I couldn't get her to latch on, and my body wasn't producing any milk anyway. And what that meant was this kind of horrible routine kind of ensued, where I had to try and get her to latch on every 2 hours because she was early. She needed feeding really regularly, and that would just mean us kind of fighting each other, and it was horrible. And then also every 2 to 3 hours I had to make up the formula to feed her with a little cup, and also I had to breast pump to try and get my milk production going. What that meant was that there was basically no time left to eat or wash or sleep. And this went on, and the days were kind of blurring into nights, and it was like really draining, and I couldn't really believe what was hitting me. I remember it was the summer of 2014. It was July, and I remember there was like one sort of seminal moment when I was in this hospital, really high up in the Royal Sussex, and I could see the whole city around us. And there was, you might remember if you were in Brighton, there was these massive electric storms like raging over the city, and it was about 4 a.m, and I was just sat there with this midwife watching these storms, and it was insane. It was like forks of lightning hitting the pier and everywhere, and the seagulls were going mad, and there were whole street lights being taken out, and it really just kind of felt like the sort of, as those lightning strikes were bolting over the city, it was like the weight and burden and responsibility of motherhood was also sort of hitting me. It was like, I'll never forget that moment. But we went home. It was like about a week later, we went home, and a sort of new normal kind of started to emerge. I resigned myself eventually to the fact I wasn't going to be able to breastfeed. We spent loads of money on it and loads of specialists. And we eventually reached the sad conclusion that I was one of this small percentage of women that can't produce breast milk, which was really sad at the time, but actually it was a massive relief because it meant I could kick that horrible routine out and just get on with it and actually start to bond with my baby instead of having this horrible fight with her every time she needed to eat. So yeah, a new normal kind of emerged. We found a new rhythm in life, and things were okay. We were tired, but it was okay. Until life threw another curveball at us. So Daisy was about 2.5 months old, and I'd had one period because I couldn't breastfeed. I think my periods came back quite quickly, and I'd had one, but this other one wasn't coming, and I was like, what's going on there? But I didn't really think much about it because obviously I felt like my body was. I'd only just had a baby, it was all over the place. And also the thing you do to get babies, we'd only done that once. And actually we realised it was a bit silly, so I took the morning after pill, so I thought that's probably another reason why it's not happening. But to put our minds at rest, I thought I'll do a test. And I weed on a stick because I was changing a nappy, and it was like, oh God, I just wee there. Finished changing a nappy and almost forgot to look at it because I was, so busy with the baby. And as I was walking out the bathroom, I was like, oh yeah, I'll just check that. And I could not believe my eyes when it said I was pregnant. And I knew how tough having a baby was because I just had one. And the thought of having two, like it was going to be like 2 under 1, I was like, shit. But me and my husband, we spoke about it, and we were like, obviously we're going to keep the baby. For us, that was the right decision. We love each other. We're going to get through it. Luckily, my husband, his job's quite portable, so we were able to up sticks, leave Brighton, rent our house out here, and rent a house in my hometown of Stamford, Lincolnshire, where my parents lived and live, and get some help from them. So that's what we did. And it was kind of at this point that I had my business idea actually, because I'd had a pregnancy, I'd had my 9 months abstinence, and I was really noticed how much I missed stuff I wasn't allowed, things like the obvious stuff like booze, so like Prosecco and gin, and also things like pate and cheese, and when I had my first baby I noticed that all the new mum gifts I received, they were lovely, but they were all incredibly baby focused, and there wasn't really anything for me, and my favourite present was my husband got me some wine and some pate, and I thought, hang on a minute, that's a really good idea for a present, why don't more of this stuff exist? Anyway, that was put on a back burner because I had another baby to deal with, and so forget that. So we moved, and Ruby was born 12 days after Daisy's first birthday, so it wasn't quite 2 babies under one, so I was already feeling good about that. And at first things were okay actually. We got all of the support systems in place, and I had my parents there. Things were okay. We were tired, but I was coping. I knew what I was doing with the whole breastfeeding thing. It was okay. But sadly, about 3 or 4 months after Ruby's birth, she started to develop this medical condition, which meant that she cried and was in pain and discomfort so much of the time. So she was crying like day and night all the time. And we tried everything. We went to see specialists, we went to see paediatricians, we went to see dietitians. We cut out certain foods, we tried different medications, we tried everything, but nothing was working. And this went on and on and on, and we were getting hardly any sleep. There were nights where my husband, like 3 or 4 times a week, he'd have to just put her in a sling and walk the streets for like 3 hours at like 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, because nothing else would stop her crying. And this went on, and it went on, and I didn't really notice my gradual decline in mental health because all I was thinking about were my babies. They were my priority, so I didn't really notice my decline. I do remember there were times when I was hallucinating sounds. I was so tired, I was just like, what is that? And it was in my head. I remember looking at the floor and seeing the pavement start to move. I was just exhausted, but I didn't really notice it. And then a few weeks later, I found myself going to some really, really dark places. So during the night, I'd be up again, and it would be like 4 in the morning, and she'd be crying, and I found myself having to just leave the room, and I found myself doing really crazy things, like I'd just have to punch walls, or I would have to scream into pillows. And then I started to do things like get my nails, and I would drag them down my arms so much that they'd bleed. And I kind of, at that point, that's what made me think, hang on a minute, this is self-harm. I sort of switched on enough to think, this is self-harm, and that's a problem. My husband was seeing the marks, and he could hear, he heard me when I was punching walls, and he was like, Sally, what are you doing? And I'd say, I just had to punch a wall, and he was like, right, you need to get some help now. We need to go and get some help. And by that point, I was so kind of broken and numb and hollow that I didn't really care. I was like, I don't care, I'll go to the doctor. So I went to the doctor, and he was a really kind of like quite a cold clinical guy, and actually that was exactly what I needed, because he just diagnosed me. He said, yeah, it's caused by stress and exhaustion, but you've got postnatal depression. And I was like, what? Really? And I thought postnatal depression was something that women get when they've just had a baby, and I thought it was an overwhelming feeling of sadness, and you don't bond with the baby. That was my understanding of postnatal depression. I had no idea that postnatal depression could manifest itself a lot later on, and then it could manifest itself in these feelings of rage and anger and frustration. So it was a real big shock to me. But actually, it was great for me. That label it really legitimised my feelings, because it meant I could go home and I could tell my partner and my family, I've got this condition. And to me, for all that time, I just felt like I was turning into an awful, horrible person. And suddenly being told that I had a condition and it had a name suddenly meant like, oh, it's not me, it's that. And I'm not mad, I'm poorly, and if I'm poorly, I can get better. And to cut a really long story short, that's what happened. I started to get better, but luckily and mainly as well because my second daughter gradually, slowly, very slowly started to grow out of this, whatever the hell this medical condition was. She was starting to sleep for slightly longer periods of time, which meant I could. My husband was amazing. When I got my diagnosis, he just took over nights for like 2 months. He just said, no, you need to sleep. I just never loved him so much in all my life when that he allowed me to do that. And as I started to get better, I started to think about this business idea again. And because my business idea was very much focused on the mums and your journey as a mum, and the fact that I didn't think there was enough around that recognised the journey of a mum, I thought, well, how can I kind of weave in this whole idea of mental health as well? Because it's quite a fun idea, like the new mum hampers full of all the stuff, you know, the luxury stuff you've not been allowed. It's quite fun, but how can I actually weave in the social aim? And it was actually my friend Helen Packham, who's spoken at Inspiring Talks before. I was talking to her and she said, you've got to talk about it, you've got to blog about it, you've got to write about it, you can make this part of your brand. And I was like, no, I can't. She's like, yeah, you can, why don't you just talk about it as you're launching it? And that's what I did. So I started to blog, and I got published in quite a few places. And before I knew it, I had an article in the Metro, and then I got an article in The Independent and The Sun. That's not my proudest one. And then I was asked to talk on the radio, and I've been on the Victoria Derbyshire show and Channel 5, and it's just really snowballed. And the weird thing is that I don't think my business would be anything like without my experience of postnatal depression. And how weird is that? But I really, not only has it helped me get the business out there, but it's also given me such an empathy and an understanding of mental health conditions. And I really feel, in a way, really privileged, because I think before, especially that experience of the self-harm thing, before that, I had no idea why anyone would self-harm. It was such an alien concept to me. Like, why would anyone do that to themselves? But having been through it myself, I totally get it. And that actually, I feel quite privileged to know that. So now, my aim is to raise awareness about perinatal mental health. And I guess I just kind of want everyone to know that perinatal mental health conditions are really common. They're really normal. It's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to not cherish every moment, and it's okay to sometimes hate being a mum. It doesn't make you a bad person. But I suppose more than that, the sort of takeaway from this talk is those dark days are really now what drives me. And I don't think when I get up in the morning and I don't want to do the accounts or whatever it is, it's that passion that drives me, and that's what gives me that fire in my belly to want to succeed, because I know the more I succeed with Mum's Back, the more awareness I can raise and the more women I can help. And yeah, that's it.